Welcome to Sit Around the Fire, the podcast dedicated to the men and women on the front lines, first responders, military personnel, and their families. I'm your host, Ashley Dillard, and together we'll explore the challenges, the triumphs, and the real stories behind the uniform. In each episode, we'll talk about mental health, wellness, and the unique culture that comes along with serving in a high-stress environment. From building strong relationships to navigating the weight of the job, this is a space where we can be real, share experiences, and support one another. Whether you're on the front lines yourself or you're supporting someone who is, this is a podcast to remind you that you are not alone. So grab a seat, pull up to the fire, and let's get into it. Well, welcome, Pete. I am super excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for taking the time and looking forward to our conversation today. I know we connected a while ago, feels like,
Yeah,
but I'm excited to get our audience a picture of who you are, the work that you're doing, and just have some talk around what mental health looks like as a first responder and in our careers. What do we do to take care of ourselves so that we do have healthy careers? So, if you don't mind, let's start with kind of digging into your story a little bit, sharing kind of who you are, what your background is.
absolutely. And thank you for doing this and for having me. Um, I, I was a first responder from 2009 through 2020 in two different areas of Colorado. The first was San Miguel, Colorado, which is down near Telluride. And I started in search and rescue there and did that for about 3 or 4 years, and then was able to move into that's a volunteer role. After spending about 4 years there, they needed somebody to have more of a full-time position with the team. So I became a patrol deputy with the sheriff's office to take on more of a hands-on role with the search and rescue team, and also have patrol duties, and performed that. I was with them from 2009 through 2016, and it was an incredible experience. And then transferred from San Miguel County to Garfield County, which was a much more populous area, and a substantial shift in the dynamic of my role. And I also started doing SWAT there. I have a long history of TBI that actually started when I was 18 months old. I flipped out of a walker, or kind of a stroller deal, and split my forehead open, knocked myself out cold. And then I'm 47, so I was born in the late 70s, and not that there's a significant amount of understanding or a difference in how they would handle it today, but back then in particularly, we had no recognition of the long-term repercussions of head trauma. So I continued to accumulate TBIs throughout my life, kind of unknowingly. I mean, back then the protocol, and I think it's still the same today, but we would fall out of a tree and knock ourselves out, and the doc would tell our parents, well, just wake them up every 2 or 3 hours throughout the night, make sure that they're awake. To this day, I've asked a number of doctors, what's the justification for waking kids up every few hours after they've had a concussion? And the only answer that I've gotten is so that the parents don't find a cold, dead body in bed. Like, if the kid has an aneurysm as a result of the TBI and dies, we'd like to find them early. You're not going to interrupt the aneurysm by waking them up. There's
Right.
no mechanism for prevention there. But by the time I hit by the time I was 6 or 7 years old, I was not sleeping anymore. And that became a regular pattern in my life. I continued accumulating. through sports and just being a rambunctious kid in the late 1900s, I was constantly smacking my head around. So fast forward to when I hit 15, I find alcohol, which suddenly becomes this tool that allows me to sleep for the first time in 9 years. And I just quickly became addicted to alcohol as a tool to allow me to sleep. I was never like, alcohol was always fun. I was in high school and then college and in my 20s and utilizing alcohol for the social lubricant that it is. But it at the end of the day allowed me to sleep. And without it, I could not sleep. I abused alcohol throughout most of my 20s. And then when I was 28 or 29, quit drinking altogether, moved to Colorado and from rural Indiana where I'd grown up, and got involved with the search and rescue team in Telluride, which was an incredible experience. And then when I got invited to become a deputy, it was kind of like, well, I already don't sleep. So a career as a first responder sounds perfect for me.
Right.
So falling in with all those guys where the remedy is you drink coffee. Like I kept a coffee mug next to bed and would drink coffee until I would finally fall asleep for 4 or 5 hours. And that was probably throughout my entire, especially my law enforcement career, I probably averaged 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night if I was lucky. It wasn't terribly unusual to get 2 or 3 hours of sleep. I loved being a cop. I got the opportunity to chase a lot of dope, especially in Garfield County. A lot of warrants, got to do a lot of exciting, fun stuff. And even throughout that time, a lot of the information on CTE was coming out. That was when the first NFL studies were starting to surface, and they were drawing a lot more attention to kind of these long-term repercussions of head trauma. And I was scoffing at it back then, thinking, if this stuff was dangerous and was a legitimate threat, I would be showing symptoms at this point. And that was kind of the mindset that I had. And then I got exposed to blast trauma, which was also not something that I had previously been aware of, but a quick kind of synopsis of what blast trauma is. The boom that people hear when a bullet is being fired out of a gun is not the gunpowder exploding. It is the projectile breaking the sound barrier. So it's creating a sonic blast. And that sonic blast can penetrate bone, but is absorbed by soft tissue like our brains. And it is particularly impactful to people left or right of the weapon that's being fired, less so somebody directly behind the weapon. So in SWAT, for example, or long days on the range, that's just repeated exposure to that blast trauma. I had 2 incidents where small explosions, breaching charges, and flashbangs went off within about a foot of my head and worked. Like I was unquestionably concussed as a result of the blast, but in the moment didn't have time to I had to keep moving, keep operating. But shortly after being exposed to those blasts, the wheels really started falling off for me. And that was about 9 or 10 years into my career. And suddenly I'm left where I can't sleep for more than 10 to 20 minutes at a time. I had been sober from alcohol, like I said, from about 29 years old. And at this point, I'm in my early 40s. And I had kind of, like I said, 4 to 6 hours of sleep wasn't bad, but suddenly I'm not able to stay asleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. I started noticing My short-term memory was really being impacted. I was having difficulty problem solving. I was getting more and more anxiety, and anxiety hadn't been something that I had dealt with for a really long time. I started my visual acuity went downhill. I'd always had really good vision, especially at night, and that started going away. Tinnitus, the ringing in my ears, got to the point that it sounded like a fax machine ringer going off in my head.
Jeez.
So the world was kind of slowly closing in around me, and my story took the exact trajectory that most people telling this story recount. I started drinking just to be able to sleep for short periods of time, which just exacerbates all of those symptoms the next day. Eventually got voluntold to go seek medical help with the issues. So I did what most people would do, and I went to my general practitioner and explained, I can't sleep. I'm starting to feel anxious. I'm describing the symptoms, and he very quickly said, well, you're exhibiting signs of a panic disorder, which is not unusual for anybody in your line of work. The things that you witness and deal with on a daily basis are very overwhelming. I'm going to give you some medications that should help. And I asked, how long will I take those medications? And I remember the doc scoffing at me and saying, you'll take those indefinitely. Mm-hmm. That didn't sound like a solution to me, and was probably the first time that I started asking myself and the people around me, like, what is there's a mechanical error taking place within my brain. And I want to understand what that mechanical error is. But I also wanted to continue working. So I walk out of the office with a prescription for Lexapro, which is an antidepressant, and Xanax. And the Lexapro said, take 1 tablet daily. And the Xanax said, take 1 daily or as needed. And I just read the as needed part. So it wasn't unusual for me to take 3-4 Xanax throughout the course of a shift. And that quickly, I was someplace, somebody saw me take one, asked what it was. I told them, it's prescription. And we quickly came to the conclusion that carrying a weapon on Xanax was probably not a good idea. So at that point, I went on to FMLA to try to figure out the problem, and spent 4 months. I ultimately knew what that I was being diagnosed with PTSD. I got 2 different diagnoses in that time, and I felt at that time that my career was over. I think most people recognize, at least at that time, I think there has been a shift in the last 4 or 5 years, but at that time, if you got a PTSD diagnosis, your career was essentially over. I left the agency. So that was all 2019. January of 2020, I left the agency. I can't say enough about all they did to try to help me navigate this space and find resolve. But there really weren't answers. At that time, the protocol for treatment, and I think even somebody today going and navigating this ailment is going to receive the same medical input and advice from traditional approaches, which is talk therapy and pharmaceutical intervention. Right. There is no mechanism for healing from antidepressants and SSRIs. I think there is a benefit for them to be utilized as a bridge for someone to find relief from symptoms for a short period of time. And that's what they were designed to be utilized, as a bridge for somebody to find better tools and get to a better place. Um, but ultimately, I left the agency in January of 2020 with the singular goal of I want to figure out what is the mechanical error that's actually taking place in my brain. And I luckily found it was January of 2020, COVID was just starting to surface. GWAT was kind of coming to an end, but all these guys are rotating home with similar problems that I was facing and similar goals of figuring out why so many of their friends were taking their own lives, why so many guys and girls were getting sick. And the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to come together. So I found the work of Dr. Mark Gordon, who's a neuroendocrinologist. So he studies the way that the brain and the hormone system work together. And he recognized that TBI impacts from blast trauma and direct blunt trauma were substantially impacting people's endocrine systems. So that's why so many of the first responders, when they get their testosterone levels, for instance, checked, are sometimes in double-digit level testosterone levels, which is bottom of the tank. Mm-hmm. That helped me substantially. But at this point, I started treatment in June of 2021. And at that point, I had digressed to the point that I was having difficulty formulating sentences. I had difficulty carrying on conversations. I was in a heavy 3-month period where I knew every day that I woke up, I was going to have to talk myself out of taking my own life at some point. So really dark period that was unlike anything I could have fathomed, and changed my entire opinion about suicide, which I think is something, our community has to respond to so many suicides on a regular basis that we develop this prejudice about it and judgment about the act of suicide as being this horribly selfish act. And after having that experience, it changed my sentiment on it substantially. Thankfully, I was able to find a way through that, and through a number of different modalities that we can get into later, found a ton of resolve. And so now I'm focused on trying to help other veterans and first responders find it to this place of healing and a better life. And that kind of gets us to this place, which is fascinating to consider, because I'm constantly, as I'm sure you are, having conversations with first responders. In the second the topic turns to mental health, the shutdown that comes from guys and girls is astounding to me. Yeah. And the justifications for why they don't want to talk about it. Last week, I was having a conversation with some sheriff's deputies. We were training jujitsu, and one of them asked me what I'm doing now, and I started explaining the work that I'm doing, and he could not have shut down the conversation faster. Yeah, we don't really have those problems here. Nobody's. We have a good system. It seems like everybody's really in a good place, and the conversation for them in these kind of, I don't want to say dismissive, because they're not trying to outright dismiss it. It's this conversation that kind of revolves around, we already have it figured out, we're good. And maybe they are, but it seems like the people that continue to come up with the same problems that everybody else is having, which to me, the way that I generally propose it is I try to help the guys and girls sleep better, which revolves around nervous system dysfunction, which is a result of prolonged stress, which is unavoidable in this business. When somebody else's life is determined by your actions, you have a stressful career.
Right.
Sleep imbalances like shift work is going to impact your nervous system. And then TBI or trauma as a whole. And trauma, if you bring up the word trauma around a first responder, you will see them completely shut off. And because when I'm talking about trauma, I love Joe Dispenza's description of trauma, which is trauma is just something that happened to us in the past that's still affecting us today. That could be a bum ankle that you see somebody still limping on, that instead of healing it when they initially sustained the injury, they just limped to work around the injury and continue moving on, which is commendable in some levels, but we do the same shit with the emotional stuff. And it impacts us in the same way. So we end up limping emotionally for the rest of our life, where if we just took the time to heal the impact of what happened to us, we would move on and not have the trauma anymore. Instead, we're carrying it.
Yeah, you alluded to that earlier when you said, like, you were talking about your story with the blast trauma, and you said, like, I just had to keep moving. And if ever there was like a tagline, I think we often use is like, you have to keep moving. Like, you don't have a choice. And I wonder if like this is still so much of the stigma and the issue that we're looking at now is this mentality that like it's highly functional dysfunction happening. Where it's like nobody is good. Like, you can't tell me your home life is awesome. Like, you don't feel awesome. But it's such a strong, like, hard-headedness against admitting that there is something wrong.
I don't know how many times I've been having conversations with guys, and probably a year or 18 months ago, I was catching up with a buddy who seems to be doing really well, but he was telling me about one of his other buddies that he was checking in with, and he said the guy was having the normal problems that we all are aware of, and calls me one day and goes, I think I figured out a workaround. I moved a refrigerator out to the garage and filled it with beer. And when I get home now, I go into the garage and I just drink 4 to 6 beers before I go inside and greet the wife and the kids. And if I do that, they don't get under my skin when I come in and talk to them.
Wow.
So the workaround was to get a little numbed up and then go in and see the wife and kids. And it's like, brother, first off, we know what those 4 to 6 beers are going to be in 6 months. It's going to be 12 to 15 beers before he goes in and sees the wife and kids. But also, you shouldn't need any beers to decompress before you go in and see the family after a shift.
Right.
That's not fixing anything. I realize that it helps, or feels like it helps in the short term, but ultimately you're increasing the neural inflammation, which at the end of the day, when we get into the physiological impacts of this job, primarily the issue that we're dealing with is inflammation. Neural inflammation, which is what triggers tinnitus and insomnia and memory loss and anxiety. All of those symptoms are just alarm bells from your body telling you, hey, something's wrong. If you deal with what is wrong and start addressing the inflammation that's coming from our diet, it's coming from the stress, the sleep imbalances, the trauma, we start reducing the inflammation, the symptoms start getting reduced as well. So we can either continue to mask this problem, pretend like it doesn't exist, and like everybody's doing well. The guys that are telling, and girls that are telling me, we're all good, we don't have these issues, have bags under their eyes, their skin looks gray, they're forgetting what they're talking about halfway through the conversation and having to go back, and then they get embarrassed, and then they don't want to talk about it at all anymore. It's the same cycle over and over and over again. And I think a lot of it comes back to we haven't known how to address these. I mean, if I look 4 years back at January 2020, when I left the agency, we didn't know about inflammation being the issue that is actually driving all of the symptoms that everybody's trying to avoid. I'm sure some doctors and scientists and maybe people within the military were aware of the issue because they were starting to address it. But broadly speaking, the first responder community in particular, we're not aware that the inflammation is actually what's driving a lot of these issues. So we couldn't address it then. And if we go all the way back to why have these same issues play, I think about my grandfather who fought in World War II and got shot down, did all these amazing things and came back and just started a family and started a business and did well and went on with his life. But he was essentially a functional alcoholic for most of his life, as were most of the people, men and women from that generation.
Right.
The same can be said with the Vietnam era. They didn't know how to deal with the repercussions of these professions and experiences, and so they masked it with alcohol. When we don't understand something, there's this very human reaction to dismiss the issue altogether, or say things like, you just got to suck it up. The suck it up mentality is great under certain circumstances, right? There are times and places that we need to just suck it up and move on. But that's not a long-term remedy for anything, especially when we start to get a better grasp of what the actual problem is. So if we start addressing the both neural inflammatory issues and the nervous system dysfunction that comes as a result of those, and we start implementing practices that will reduce both of those impactful elements, the symptoms go away.
Right. Yeah, they do.
Which seems really simple, but it's not. It takes a lot of investment and work and getting first. There's the old saying that the only thing that cops hate more than death is change. And it seems like the fire community is pretty similar in that we just want to do our job and not have to think about anything outside of that. And I get it, because the job can be all consuming, but this is part of the job. And we need to be addressing it head on so that our suicide rates and mental health issues are not as overwhelming as they are within these communities, in my opinion.
No, I totally agree with you. Like, there's some easy fixes that I think is slowly starting to trickle down the pipeline, but it's like turning a ship. We got a long way to go till we get there. But I'm curious to hear from you, even whether it's in your own experience or from what you've seen in individuals that you encounter and work with, is what do you notice happens to people's like relationships in their personal life when this really starts to become impactful?
When the symptoms become overwhelming?
Yeah, or what did you, because I feel like this, it's a gradual, like I try to remind people, like, we didn't just get here overnight, therefore like unwinding it and flipping a switch doesn't exist. Like, the work continues. But what did you start to notice, like I said, either in your personal life or from others that you've encountered and seen, friends and whatever, of like, how did this start to show up outside of the job?
Well, I think there's a reason that the first responder community as well as the military community have astronomically high divorce rates, right? And I think I've seen numbers anywhere from 65 to 80% of marriages end in divorce within these communities collectively. I think that is directly attributable to a lot of the ailments that we're talking about with the mental health stuff. You get so closed off, and it's multifaceted. Anytime that someone is dealing with an ailment that is ultimately kind of an invisible force that nobody really knows how to deal with head on, it feels wildly alienating. It feels lonely, and not just for the person suffering from it, but also for the people that love them. Because what inevitably happens is the person starts to isolate more and more and more. That isolation is pushing both their kids and spouse and everybody else that cares for them away. And it is, I feel compassion and empathy for the person who's suffering from it. And I understand it firsthand. I did not want anybody around me, because it felt like nobody could possibly understand what I was going through. And that was reflected in everybody's kind of input on how I needed to fix the problem. I think that's why it's so important to try to get ahead of the problems and start treating them before they are presenting as overwhelming symptoms. But I think these are unquestionably the reasons that so many of the marriages fall apart. And you see both men and women from these communities losing connection with the relationships of their children and their closest friends, and then the agencies that they work for. Your world really starts to fall apart when you are dealing and living in the darkness that accompanies these ailments. It's when it was happening during COVID, like my experience was such that it was really, really easy to isolate because I was being told I needed to. I could have the liquor store deliver 2 days worth of booze to me every couple of days. I didn't even have to, I could pay for everything online. They'd drop it off at the front door. I didn't even have to interact with people. So it's why the suicide rates are what they are. It feels like the world is closing in on you, and there haven't been answers for it for so long, that the easiest answer is and the void. So my experience with the suicidal ideations was like nothing that I thought it would be. The impulse to take my own life felt no different than the impulse to go to the bathroom, or that I was hungry or thirsty or tired. It was that innate, and this repeating message of I am a burden to society. I am a threat to my community. I stopped trusting how I would react in certain situations. I felt like I was an inherent threat to anyone around me and my community, and I had this responsibility to self-eliminate, to ensure that I didn't hurt anybody else. And it wasn't that I was having violent thoughts about other people or actions that I wanted to take. It felt like this monster was inside of me, and I needed to eliminate it. The entirety of the experience was like nothing I could have imagined, top to bottom. So when we're trying to consider how it impacts the other people around us, they're losing their loved one. You are not the person that you used to be when you're dealing with these ailments. You're really not. So it changed my perspective, not just on this, but drug addicts as a whole. A lot of the people, I didn't feel much different from the people that I used to arrest. I was recognizing like the only thing that's separating me from some other junkie or somebody stealing stuff is the level of desperation that I have financially right now. And I was still able to keep a roof over my head. So I wasn't having to go out and steal other people's properties to keep myself comfortable, thankfully. But I wasn't too far away from it. And, I started understanding that level of desperation on a more personal level. It was it was uglier than anything I could have imagined. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I really appreciate like your openness and vulnerability to talk about it because I think it's such a huge thing that we have to talk about. Like a lot of people still, it's getting better, but a lot of people still like to skirt around, and a lot of agencies just don't know what to do with it either. But
I
it's
know.
becoming very, very, very real and almost like it's kind of. I went to a funeral a few months ago, and I remember catching myself saying, "Man, it feels good to be at a funeral where somebody just died of natural causes." And I was like, "How the hell did we get here?" Like how being so used to going to suicide funerals, and yet I was like grateful to just have a normal funeral to go
Yeah.
to. It's like I don't think that this is good. Like I don't think we're headed in the right direction with this, and it's like you said that the desperation and just no longer it's not so much not wanting to be alive anymore. It's just not wanting to live what this is living. It's just too much. Like, and you feel like you have no hope out of it. Like there's no way out of it.
And like you're never going to get better. Something that we the idea it is when you're in a healthier space, or at least my experience now, if I'm physically ill, if I have a viral infection of some sort, and I'm really uncomfortable, it's easy for me to go, you know what, I'm sick right now. This may last 2 or 3 days, but after that, I know I'm going to feel better, and this is a temporary impact on my health. Um, when I was sick with the TBI stuff, the PTSD, however we want to label it, it felt like this is how I'm going to have to live and experience life forever. And I, 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 I knew that I do not have the capacity to carry that level of pain indefinitely. And that's where the suicide stuff starts coming in, because you recognize there's a shelf life for my tolerance to this level of pain. And if I can't find some way to intervene on this pain, I have to end it the only way that I know of. And so I understand when I hear about suicides now, and I don't judge the person, but in the back of my head, I honestly believe that nearly any ailment that exists, from a mental health standpoint, can be remedied with the right approach at this point. I'm not suggesting that something like schizophrenia, or some of these really volatile dispositions can be remedied. I'm not downplaying the severity of those, but I do feel like elements that are afflictions like PTSD and the major stuff that we are dealing with broadly in the communities that you and I are from can be remedied with the right approach. SSRIs and antidepressants have no mechanism for healing that. So when I hear about programs that, for instance, offer indefinite mental health counseling and SSRI or pharmaceutical intervention, that to me feels like a band-aid approach to this issue. And I think that, I don't want to sound like I'm not suggesting that agencies aren't doing the best that they can. I just, like you were saying, I don't think they understand the problem well enough to really address it head on. And if they did, they would recognize this is a lot easier than what we are. You know, law enforcement agencies have mandatory trainings that they have to do throughout the year, whether it's defensive tactics or driving training or shooting range. There are these different training modalities that are required. If we started teaching stuff like breath work, hot and cold exposure, diet and supplementation, and started focusing on addressing these issues and teaching people the tools to regulate their nervous system prior to the symptom surfacing and presenting as overwhelming, we will stay ahead of this problem. But until we recognize causation and methods for legitimate healing of like what is causing this problem, we can't get away from prolonged stress. There's no way to mitigate the levels of stress within this job. It's going to be something that we have to carry. There's somebody always has to work night shift, somebody has to work day shift. So there's always going to be a level of sleep deprivation impacting this community. There's always going to be some level of trauma. And back to this trauma issue, I never felt like the traumatics, like handling a dead body it didn't feel traumatic to me. It just felt like part of the job and part of the process. But even if it doesn't feel traumatic, there is a physiological response that's happening within my body, whether it's cortisol or neuroepinephrine. There are a number of different chemicals that are being released within my body through every one of those experiences. And if I'm not doing something to mitigate that chemical response within my body, it's going to accumulate to a point that it feels overwhelming. So when we start recognizing the physiological impacts of these jobs and ways to mitigate those impacts, we get relief. And it's really simple when we approach it from more of a scientific standpoint, instead of just going, well, some people just need to suck it up more and other people aren't. And on some level, so when I got sick, it was really hard for me because I'm looking around at guys that have been doing the job for 20 years longer than I had. And I'm asking myself, they're not dealing with this shit. Why am I?
Right. Yeah.
Common dialogue that takes place in a lot of people's brain. Well, they might not have had the TBI impacts that I had dealt with for most of my life. Some of us are predisposed to be more vulnerable to the impact of this stuff than other people are. Maybe they just haven't reached their threshold of it. We all have our own personal threshold. So we need to get that kind of judgment out of the way as well, and recognize, if I would have had these tools at the beginning of my career, if somebody would have been teaching me this stuff at the academy level and I could have been utilizing them throughout my career, I think I would still be active today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I worked with a lot of 20 and 30-year, whatever you want to call them. And when you're in it, it's hard to see. I think you just recognize them as like, oh, they're super salty, or oh, they don't want to run any calls, or they're pretty much checked out. But when you take a step back and you actually see what's happening, you can see where the deterioration is coming in, and what using language like I used to, or I like to do this, and no longer, like that's a huge sign of where somebody is at. And there's so many, like we've already talked about the divorce side of it, but many of those 20 and 30-year guys like are on their second, third marriage or whatever. And so it's so interesting how in the moment you feel so like this is only a me thing, but really just everybody has their thing going on under the surface somewhere where stuff's not getting handled, and or they're, using substances or drugs or, gambling, excessive spending, whatever it is, whatever their outlet is. It's everybody's got something, because the job is just, it's too much, too fast, too soon. So I look at it with stress and trauma. It's too much for our nervous system to be able to process all of that. And it leaves a score. Like they talk about, the body keeps score. So your brain does such a good job at convincing you, like, oh yeah, like that call wasn't that bad, or that dead body wasn't that bad, or whatever. It's just another day, right? We literally use those words. It's just another day in the office.
Yeah.
Or start your day with a DOA. We always used to say like it was normal, like, and it's like, no, it's not normal. Like it's not normal to see all those things. Our systems weren't designed for that level of stress and trauma all the time. So we do have to have some way to mitigate it. That's what would you, how would you speak now to some of the guys or and gals, when we say that, like collectively, who are let's say like the 2 to 5 year window? What would you speak to those folks directly on how just beginning their career? What would you tell them to do now, start doing so that they can have a long, healthy career with an identity outside of the career?
Have you read Waking the Tiger by
Hmm.
Peter Levine?
Yes. Peter Levine is such a badass.
Brilliant, right? He has this that the great example of uh, in the natural environment, if a cheetah is chasing a gazelle and the gazelle gets away, a few minutes after the chase, you'll see the gazelle do this little shiver. And that is a trauma shiver. And that trauma shiver allows the gazelle to release the experience of the chase from its database. And if it didn't do that, it would remain hypervigilant. It would never put its head down to eat again, and it would starve to death and die. Through this trauma shiver, it releases the experience. It goes back to feeding and forgets that the cheetah was ever there until the next chase. Humans are designed to do the same thing. We've just forgotten how. So when I put that into context with people and go, now, if you think throughout your life, how many times have you been chased by the cheetah and not done that trauma shiver? How much shivering do you have to do to get back to equilibrium? It's a lot of shaking, but you got to start somewhere, right? So the earlier that we start addressing our nervous system and recognize the impacts that it has on our daily life, especially when we do one of these jobs, the better off we are going to be. And that is top to bottom. It's what you are putting into your body, not just food wise, but also, you know, this community relies on gas station burritos, energy drinks, MREs, and just garbage, all that impacts our nervous system through inflammatory markers. So we got to start mitigating that and recognizing the impacts that those elements are having on our bodies and our system. Alcohol, drugs, all perpetuate inflammation throughout our system. So recognizing what is driving the inflammation, how to reduce it, how to keep ourselves in a more steady place are all fantastic steps to start taking immediately. Developing a breathwork practice. I would say whether it's in the first 2 to 5 years or somebody who has been doing this job for 30 to 50 years, the biggest difference that I have seen in how someone is going to navigate the space of being impacted by these ailments and getting to a better place or not getting to a better place is their connection to faith. And I don't mean religion, I mean faith. This idea that they are here for a reason, that they have something to live for beyond themselves, and that they can rely on that faith when they get to these moments of real desperation. That has been the biggest determining factor, not just in my experience, but broadly in most of the practitioners that I'm speaking with who help people navigate these spaces. They see faith as one of the biggest determinants to whether somebody is going to get better or not. Mm-hmm. And faith encompasses a lot, one of which is gratitude. It is really easy in these lines of work to become jaded and pessimistic and negative, broadly speaking. If we can find things to be grateful for in the moment versus just having a negative view of circumstances in our environment, um, that makes a big difference as well. So kind of a perspective element, and what we rely on in those moments of desperation, those determining factors are huge in my experience. Does
Yeah.
that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that. Like I often ask, and I had to ask myself too, like where's my connection to humanity? Or am I still seeing people as people, or am I seeing them as problems or burdens or just another call to run
Yeah.
on? And that was a huge wake up call for me too, is like why I forgot that this is actually a person. Like that this and that's a huge, I think a huge sign. And I love the gratitude. I talk about that a lot all the time because gratitude will move you through any situation. It
Yeah.
can. And you have to have something because you cannot make it on gas station burritos and energy drinks. Like
No,
that's not sustainable.
no, it's not. And, this isn't it's such a funny topic. Like, I feel like the dietary stuff in particular, I've always been a little bit snobby about my food. I don't know, even as a little kid, I didn't eat my birthday cake because sugar just has always made me not feel well. And I always like cleaner food. So it was a very easy thing for me to keep a clean diet. But the response that I've gotten, even when I was still wearing the monkey suit, and as a cop, I would come in to eat, and most of the guys would look at my food and go, "That's what my food eats," uh, because I'm having vegetables with my meat. Uh, so the dynamic within uh, the dynamic within the law enforcement in particular, and I don't know how what the fire community is like as far as diet on a broad scale, but I'm guessing um, you guys are throwing together whatever's in the firehouse at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to eat that's convenient versus what's healthiest for me. Um, it's an issue, and if we're not looking at that head on, it's going to continue to be an issue. The fact that there are no national fitness standards for first responders is pathetic to me.
Mhm.
Like, if we're responsible for saving the day for other people, and we're overweight, we're not healthier than they are, why would they look to us as a resource for safety? So the conversation around our national heroes needs to be a little more focused on how do we um, maintain our health in a way that reflects our capacity to be able to um, answer the call. And I don't I don't know that I think it is reflective of the state of our mental health within this community nationwide as well, that we're just not addressing this in the most fluid way possible, which would be your mental health is going to follow your physical health.
Right. Yeah, it was interesting. I was having a conversation with a friend a month or so ago, and he's a firefighter still online, and he was telling me that he like is very much one of those like grows his own food, like kills his own meat. Like it doesn't get more natural than the method he takes. And he from the outside looks like he's in good shape. Like he works out, he does everything he's supposed to, and yet his blood work came back recently showing how much plaque he does have, like showing up in his arteries right now. And how I think when we look at this national standard is it really needs to be a full collective look at where are people's hormones, where are they at cardiovascularly, like what is stress, because that's an impact of stress. Like adrenaline and cortisol prolonged over time is going to cause increased inflammation Like it's just a fact. That's what it
Sure.
does. And so that, and now, like, it's so interesting because I don't know on the police side, but fire side's very like moving towards cancer awareness and cardiovascular health as two, because so many people are dying after they retire.
Totally.
And so I think it's like we need to also be having a conversation around, oh yeah, what are these stress hormones doing to us over time? Where like they are actually like making us sicker than we think they are, causing us to have poor diets or lack of exercise or all those things. But it's not just that. Like it's the stress is such a big impact.
I don't know why we are, and my hope in the future is that um, getting appropriate blood work panels done, um, ideally quarterly, but biannually at a minimum, to monitor those levels. And um, I can almost see the fallout from it coming, that somebody will be high and have to get pulled off the line for an extended period of time. We need to be doing the blood panels, looking at those blood panels, and then have a known path for resolve to those blood panels to get them back to a good place and then maintain that long term. And I think that's where a lot of the practices that we're talking about come into place. Like you mentioned breath work to a lot of people and they'll eye roll or scoff at it. Like this is a known way to lower a, a lot of those markers that we're talking about, whether it's cortisol levels or adrenal levels. The adrenal burnout in these communities is astronomical. Um, all of those elements are going to impact you both in the short and the long term. The short term is, I feel like I can't sleep, which if you can't sleep, you are compromised. So anybody telling me that we're not having problems, and I go, how's everybody sleeping? Well, that's an issue. But other than that, we're fine. It's like if you can't sleep, that's a really, really, really impactful element. And I will say, when you give somebody back the ability to sleep through natural means, and it's not a pharmaceutical intervention that's actually going to inhibit their sleep, it may make them feel like they're sleeping, but they're not going to have restful, legitimate 6 to 8 hours of sleep. When you give somebody back that ability, the healing that starts to take place immediately is astronomical and a beautiful process to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you don't realize, again, when you're in it, you drink the Kool-Aid. You don't realize
100%.
till you're out of it and you're like, whoa, like this is not. And
Well,
it's just
the
crazy.
sleep, it also becomes this almost, in my experience, it was you call on duty, you inevitably make your way down to the patrol office. And at some point in the 12-hour shift, everybody's going to be sitting in the patrol office, and the conversation will be, how much sleep did you get last night? How much sleep did you get? And it spreads out, and everybody, and it's almost this badge of honor, who got the least amount of sleep. And then we're going to monitor them. We're going to see how they behave throughout the night. And those guys usually do really well because they're so focused on, I have to be more aware. I only got 2 hours of sleep or an hour of sleep or no sleep. I worked a 38-hour shift at one point. That was the longest that I ever worked. And I'm sure that the supervisors at the top of the ladder had no idea that I was on for that amount of time. And I was going because it was exciting and I didn't want to be pulled off and I didn't want to be out of the uh, the fun. But we know after, what is it, 15? Is it 15 hours? There used to be this metric that we could, after 15 hours, you are essentially functioning at a zero point zero 0.08 alcohol level or higher,
Mm-hmm.
or the equivalent of that. Like that's your mental capacity.
Yeah.
So more than double that, I was probably not functioning at a terribly high cognitive level. But I went home and probably slept 6 hours and went right back to work and couldn't get enough of it. And that's something that we don't talk a whole lot about, but it's really interesting, is the addictive nature of this job. I didn't want to be away from the action. That part impacts our family life and our connection to our kids and certainly our spouses, that at the end of the day, like, I would drop everything or anything that was going on with my family to run to the action, because that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the chaos. Mm-hmm. You get addicted to the chaos.
Yeah, you do. And I think you mentioned, like, it becomes a badge of honor of, like, oh, I have to abandon my family because the department needs me. Or, I mean, we even say it, like, the community needs you, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes very a praised behavior to be in, and all we're in is the sympathetic state for that. The threshold just keeps getting higher and higher. And I noticed this in myself when I was still online, and I think we went to like Disney World or something and got on a roller coaster, and I had like zero response to the ride. Yeah. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. Like, I just felt nothing and I was like, holy crap, my thresholds for that, like, draw to the excitement and the energy and what I need to hit that threshold to feel something was so high. I couldn't even feel it on a freaking roller coaster. And it totally becomes addictive. And I think it's also, it keeps us out in more of like a functional freeze, we call it, from the nervous system standpoint, where you're doing what you need to do in the moment, but every time you're not in that environment, you go back into the isolating, withdrawing, disassociating, numbing out. And we're just in this constant battle between the two. But we're never really coming out of those sympathetic states, and it just keeps perpetuating. And I think it becomes people's identity so much that they just don't know what to do outside of the job.
Entirely. And when that starts to be pulled away from you from these invisible ailments, and you're suddenly in this place of, like, I mean, the idea of being a civilian was so foreign to me at that point, when my career slowly started being taken away from me, that it was probably a year or more after the fact before I remember kind of looking around and going, oh, I don't know who I am now. All my patches, my cool guy patches, my ID cards, all the identifying markers that set me apart from the rest of society are gone. Like, who am I now? And that took a long time to find an answer to. We get very wrapped up in being the title that accompanies this job. And this is something that you hear from veterans constantly as they rotate back to civilian life, is the transition period is often really, really difficult. It's the same for first responders when they rotate back to being a civilian in their community. You don't suddenly see the world as a civilian again. You will always see the world through the lens of that career that you had as the first responder. So that adjustment takes a really long time. And if you are continuing to struggle with the ailments, it's even more ostracizing. And that it just, we have to find a way to start educating people on these issues prior to them presenting as overwhelming symptoms. Something that I have heard time and time again so when I'm generally working with people one-on-one, and it's about, we'll do 2 sessions a week for 4 weeks. And the first 2 sessions are generally just, I'm explaining the problems. I'm explaining the problems, how we're going to treat it. the next 2 weeks after that are really them navigating these different modalities for dealing with the impact of the stuff. And then the last 2 sessions that we have in that 4th week are generally just us kind of talking and them recognizing the benefits that they've found from the process. But in the midst of all of that, what I hear time and time again from them is, once I understood what was wrong, once you explained to me what was wrong and how to address the issues that were wrong, it was really easy. And these are oftentimes, because of the resistance from the first responder community, I have worked with primarily veterans, and those veterans have had really tumultuous experiences. And most of the ones that I'm dealing with are at the absolute end of their rope, and they're reaching out because they've tried everything else and nothing else has worked effectively. And we get this done in 4 weeks. 4 weeks, they're in a better place. They're sleeping. They feel better. Their marriage is in a better place. Their connection with their kids is in a better place. And it's because we're not trying the bullshit anymore. We're not trying to mask it. We're not trying to push it down. We're addressing it head on. We're dealing with it, and the problems go away. There is a variety of shit to deal with, to unpack, and for them to continue to work through for the rest of their life. But that's the fun part of life when you're doing it right, is addressing all the problems that you had in your developmental years and how those shaped you to an adult that eventually reached this crossroads where they needed help and interventions that they hadn't found yet. And then they find resolve. And it doesn't mean that all your problems go away. It just means that you have better ways of navigating those problems as they surface throughout the rest of your life. And I think that's the really, really cool part. And these are conversations that I'm having all the time. Of Routt County, where I'm living now, has had really high suicide rates, and the alternative options that exist in this valley are widespread. There's Warhorse Ranch, that's an incredible equine center that's pushing EMDR and different modalities of talk therapy that aren't just sit down and let's talk about how you're feeling. It's more dealing with the nervous system. There's Emerald Integrated. There's all these different modalities available here, and we're finding people still feel desperate because they just aren't aware. Because generally speaking, until somebody reaches the breaking point, they don't want to explore all the different options that are out there or even consider them. They don't want to. It's like anything else. Like, I don't know a whole lot about cancer treatment because I never had cancer, knock on wood. Until you are sick, and we don't value our health until it's suddenly being taken away from us. With these ailments, we can start addressing them prior to them presenting with symptoms. So we can get ahead of it and not have to deal with the fallout of it, if you will.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent.
No, I love it. That's what we're here for, is tangents. It's a perfect place. No, I think that's the work that I'm doing, that I've seen, the education around it, and just having support to have somebody like talk you through the why of why this is showing up in your nervous system, and now it's a behavior or a thought pattern or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't a lot of that yet. It's getting better. We're coming along, but it is. And I think what I've noticed in my work is that once people come and do the work for themselves, other people they work with start to see the change and the shift. And those people are definitely drawn to, like, hey, like, what's going on? Or the person who is doing the work recognizes these ailments or shifts in people and calls them out. And I think that's where we're going to see the biggest change, is like from the boots on the ground standpoint, rather, as much as we would love an overhaul of the way systems and agencies are doing the work. I think within each other and within your own crews and your own squads and everything is where you're going to do the change first. And you can start impacting people on such a huge level by just showing up for them and recognizing it and having resources to offer people, because not everything fits for everybody. But it's huge. I've seen it happen and it's been so cool to watch, like truly a community building.
Well, and we're seeing it's evidence through us having this conversation right now, and the people that'll listen to this program. If there are that's, I think the most important thing for people to understand is there are resources, even if they don't need them now. Be aware that there are outlets for information, and if it come, whether it's the person themselves or one of their loved ones, a friend, colleague, whatever it might be, if you need answers, reach out to somebody and ask. It doesn't mean you're going to be locked into there's anonymity. Everybody that I know that operates within this space is wildly understanding and respectful of the privacy element. So I've intentionally not gone and gotten a psychotherapy license or a counselor's license, because I didn't want to go talk to a shrink who had never carried a weapon for a living about carrying a weapon for a living. I was more than happy to talk to one of the guys or girls that I knew had done the job and would understand what I was talking about when I would talk about these different impactful experiences that I had had. So you don't have to go the traditional route of sitting down in an office and talking to a doc if that's not appealing to you. You don't have to take SSRIs and antidepressants if that's not appealing for you. There are a number of different modalities available in today's society that are readily available, and people will be more than happy to jump to help you. I know I charge veterans and first responders $100 a session to ensure that they can afford the stuff. So the month-long program that I'm talking about costs somebody $800 out of pocket. Sometimes they can apply for different scholarships that are available through like Colorado Firefighters Trust that we talked about. Offers different reimbursement programs depending on what the training or resource that they're utilizing is available. Our county here in Route offers a number of different scholarship programs for different modalities of treatment. There's reps reaching every person to prevent suicide. They offer different outlets to reimburse people for alternative modalities of treatment. So there are resources out there, and if you don't know where to start, reach out to me through ASM, shoot me an email. I will do everything I can to find you the resources that you need to get you to a better place, even if that's not me as the resource. I'm going to get you to the right place. There are a variety of times that somebody reaches out to me and I read what they're dealing with and go, this is way outside of my wheelhouse, but let me get you to this person that will get you to a better place. I didn't have any of that when I first started. Like, it was, if you're not going to take our method, good luck to you. And you're kind of out in the cold on your own. And I hated that.
Yeah.
So, and I've talked to everybody that I know of that's working in this area, have said the same thing. If we can't get them what they need, we'll get them to the right person to ensure that they can. So start there, right? If you're having problems, if one of your loved ones is having problems, reach out to a resource, explain what's going on. Even if it seems like not a big deal, it may be something that somebody goes, hey, try giving them some magnesium that might help with their sleep. There's an easy resolve. You give them the magnesium, they feel better, they start sleeping, and the other problems go away. It can be that easy. It really can.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's so many cool resources out there now, and it's just about like you just have to start somewhere. You have to reach
Yeah.
out. Like you have to. I'm curious for this season of for you, the season of now being a different kind of helper and transitioning into the role that you are. How do you feel like your mission or your sole purpose has changed in that way? How are you accepting it and moving into what you're doing now?
Um, it's a great question. I have had a number of different opportunities to go back and work for different agencies, and the idea of doing working night shift again sounds so wildly unappealing to me that I, everything inside of me is like, oh, I would love to be back in the game. Like the idea of getting into a foot pursuit still gives me tingles all over. There are so many elements of the job that I miss, but I can also take a step back and recognize I had this horrible. I never wanted stripes on my sleeves. I never wanted to be in a command position because I had a few experiences early on where I was stuck in a command position and something bad happened with the guys out in the field. And that was the most vulnerable feeling that I'd have. Like if I was with them, I'd be able to help. And in this command position, I don't feel like I can. But I can recognize now that like this is a young man's game. This is by the time guys are my age or getting older, um, we have a much better opportunity to utilize the experiences that we garnered when we were younger and utilize those from a command position to ensure that everybody gets out of the field safely. And that's what I feel like I'm doing now. I'm in this position where I can utilize the experiences that I've had to ensure that the guys and girls that need help can get the help and get to a better place. And then it feels like I'm in this command capacity and still having an impact on the community and helping people in need. So there's still a reward system. I don't have to do the ugly stuff that I didn't want to do. A whole lot less paperwork on this end than there would be on that end. And I'm feeling happy. And I am my own biggest guinea pig in this whole process. So I'm constantly changing my practices and adjusting my practices and then tweaking them in ways that I'm able to continue learning. And those experiences allow me to help other people implement these practices into their life in the most appropriate way to reap those same benefits. So it's dynamic and always ever evolving. And I think from a science standpoint, we are going to continue to understand this process at a deeper level in a variety of ways. The psychedelic stuff that has continued to evolve and come up and present in a number of different legal ways, at least in the state of Colorado, are wildly exciting to me. I think in the coming years, we are going to see a number of different outlets open up for first responders. Right now, there are ketamine options that I know a lot of the men and women from our community are taking advantage of, and I think those are great. But down the road, whether it's MDMA, Ibogaine for the veterans is showing wild benefits.
Mm-hmm.
MDMA psilocybin, whatever the modality might be, I think those are going to help resolve a lot of both the neurological inflammation issues and a lot of the traumatic issues that whether we know it or not have an impact. And then we're going to get people to these places where, like you're talking, it's not an anomaly to see the guys and girls who have spent 30-40 years in one of these professions reach retirement, and within 2 to 5 years of retirement either die from alcoholism or drug addiction or suicide, some horrible outcome that could have been avoided by addressing these issues earlier. And I think that's where the psychedelics will come in really valuable, is offering them resolve from a career of serving other people, and really the sacrifices that they have offered their community, bringing them some healthy resolve and allowing them to live out the rest of their life in a much better place.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think the shift is happening and it's going to be so cool. The work that's already being done is transforming people's lives for sure. Okay, so I have a few questions at the end that I like to do with everybody. So
Yeah.
give us an idea of what book you are reading right now.
I was reading one of Robert Greene's books, Mastery, and I haven't gotten very far into it, so I don't have a lot to report from that. Prior to that, this has nothing to do with mental health, but I was on a long Cormac McCarthy binge and going back through a lot of his books, which I love the way he writes, but yeah, those are kind of uninteresting in relation to mental health.
You got to have a balance of both.
I agree. Yeah.
You can't just drown yourself in all the heavy books.
Thankfully, my significant other she's a psychotherapist, that works in has a focus in trauma, and so a lot of the books that we read in exchange are related to that. There was a How to Breathe book that was great that we were going through not too long ago, and obviously Levine's books and the like are always in revolving trade-offs between the two of us.
Yeah, nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of, share with us like what's your favorite self-care practice that you're doing for yourself now?
There are a few that I don't. So breath work is a daily practice, whether that is a 5-minute just focused cycle, or whether it's in a cool down effort after a big workout or run. I practice jujitsu regularly, which then requires me to focus a ton of time on my mobility and ensuring that, so kind of physical therapy, mobility stuff, my diet, supplementation. These are the staples that I have to get in on a daily basis. So breath work, diet, supplementation, gut microbiome focused stuff. I don't deviate from those. I will do some level of stretching and mobility work on a daily basis. I will get at least 1 to 2 days of rest where I don't have exercise and just allow my body to recuperate. But even on those days, I'm still doing some kind of mobility work. So very focused on physical health. My diet, I don't deviate from. The journaling is a practice that I should probably do every day, but I probably do 5 to 6 days a week at a minimum. And that has been one of the best ways for me to track progress or lack thereof. So if I start having interruptions in what I feel like is my overall well-being, I can usually attribute it directly to I either got away from diet, maybe when I'm traveling, I didn't eat enough or didn't eat well enough. I didn't get mobility work in. The brain doesn't recognize the difference between physical and emotional pain. So if I have some impingement in my structure, my body's going to be reacting just like I had some impactful emotional event taking place. And so to mitigate that, I try to ensure that my body is fluid and free of impingement as much as possible. The gratitude and faith practice is just kind of a daily focus that I have. And that's the cycle of thought. That pattern of thought is what is creating my daily reality and affecting the lens through which I'm viewing the world and interacting with the outside world. So if I am being overly negative, if I am being judgmental, if I am angry, that's the way that the world's going to look to me. If I can change that perspective and shift it to a gracious focus that has a lot more to do with appreciation and love, then that's how I'm going to view the world. So I try to focus on these tools that are the same tools that I teach to the people that I'm lucky enough to work with, that go a really long way. I think breath work is probably the most important tool that first responders can utilize on a daily basis to help regulate their nervous system and get them to a better place. And we're already doing it. Like we teach breath work on the shooting range. We teach to fire at the bottom of a breath. I'm guessing fire teaches in different elements to help regulate when you have masks on and heavy equipment. It will go further for you than any other tool that I am aware of at helping to regulate and just bring yourself back to a calm, peaceful place. And it doesn't take more than, we just read a study the other day that found 5 minutes of focused breath work is as beneficial as 20 to 30 to 60 minutes. So the 5 minute window is really all that you need. There was no more benefit found in doing 20 minutes of it versus 5 minutes. So anybody that says they don't have time for this stuff is lying to themselves and just happy in the space that they are finding themselves.
Yeah. And I call it minimal effective dose.
Totally.
You don't have to do the 20, 30-minute
Right.
seated, very like strict, stringent, like 5 minutes.
Right.
That's like don't have to be crazy about it. So I like that you
No.
brought it up. Yeah. Um, any any particular holiday tradition or anything that Christmas is coming up, so that you're particularly looking forward to?
Oh man. Um, I mean, I'm still getting used to being able to enjoy these holidays, right? That's a privilege that most people in the community don't really get. So, no, I think just appreciating the people that I love and I'm lucky enough to spend my daily life with, and getting to enjoy these little moments and rest and relaxation and good food. That'll be enough for me to focus on and find gratitude for. Um, yeah, it's a fun holiday to start to appreciate again.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. It'll be a year for me, the end of December, that I've been offline, and I'm the same way. I'm like, what do I do? I've never
Yeah,
not worked holidays. Like, I don't know what to do.
there's definitely a little guilt
Hmm.
that comes along with it.
Yeah.
Like, why do I get to enjoy this when other people aren't?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole very interesting shift that happens when you come offline. that I
Yeah.
think is that's a whole nother topic to discuss, but it's a very intricate process to rewiring your brain.
Yeah. Somebody said early on when I had kind of gotten through the really ugly parts and was beginning the healing process. And I remember somebody saying, you know, be kind to yourself through this process. And that concept was so foreign to me that I had saying, like, what do you mean? And they were like, just like, be kind to yourself. Like, allow yourself to feel the things that you're feeling. Don't cast judgment on yourself. Don't chastise yourself for feeling or thinking certain things. It's like being introduced to an entirely new environment or space that you've never been in before. Be kind enough to allow yourself to navigate it freely, explore it, find what you like, find what you don't like, and try everything on, and you know, find your happiness again. Be kind to yourself. Like that's an easy gift to give to yourself, to just allow yourself to readjust to these new spaces in life, whether that's being online or offline. When we first come into these communities, it's very easy to be, I just got to suck it up. I got to take whatever pain's coming, and this is my litmus test for being capable of doing the job. And we don't have that space to be kind to ourselves. Once you're in there, you're adjusted, you got some years under your belt, start being kind to yourself. Like, allow yourself a little space to go, I've earned the right to take care of myself. I've earned the right to recognize the impact that this job is inevitably going to have on my brain and my body. And I'm going to allow myself to utilize different practices that will help mitigate the impact that these elements are having on my life. Just be kind to yourself. I feel like that is a foreign concept for most people in these communities. So it was a good bit of advice, and I encourage anybody else to take it as well.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's perfect. Tell us about where people can find you and connect with you.
Yeah, thank you. ASM, Adam Sam Mary Foundation.com is my website. We're on Instagram as well. So there are contact forms through the website, and then obviously direct messages on Instagram. Either of those, I check myself directly, so I'll get those messages and respond as quickly as I can. But whether that's just you want information about what ASM does, or just a general inquiry about anything that we've discussed today, or the problem as a whole, please, people, feel free to reach out to me for any of that. If I can't help you directly, I will get you to somebody that can. That's one promise that I will absolutely make. We'll find you the help that you need, and it's all confidential. I'm not going to go back to your department and tell them that you're dealing with some stuff that's between the two of us, and I'll keep it that way.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. No, I'm super excited for people to connect with you, and super proud of the work you're doing, and just it's cool to have another person, another helper in the field to connect people with. So really, truly, truly honored, and truly very honored and thankful for you coming on the show today too. Excited.
Thank you. And I'm grateful that you're doing it. We need all these voices working together. And that's, it's an easy step that we can all take to try to help. So thank you for having me, and let's keep the discussion going.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sit Around the Fire. We're excited to keep the conversation and connection going. I invite you to check out our website, link in the description below. Also, don't wait to get signed up for the upcoming workshop, Strengthening Bonds, working on efficient communication between first responders and their partners. You can sign up for this via the website or the link in the description in the notes. We look forward to sitting around the fire again with you very soon.